Okay. Yay. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Let's start again. Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody in person. Welcome. And hello, everybody on Zoom. My husband told me, he's like, I don't know how you teach on both. I said, we figured out a pretty happy medium. I don't know. In the beginning, it was hard, but now I feel like we figured it out. I look up and I look down. But ladies, those of you, God willing, after the summer when we resume classes again, I hope I'll see all of you in person. I love the idea of having the Zoom option because if obviously someone's out of town or someone's not well, it's amazing to be able to log in. But I definitely miss the live interaction. So I'm glad that we at least get both of it. All right. So we're in the Chumash of Bamidbar, which is book number 4. So we have the first book is, say it with me, Bereshis. What's the second book? Shemos. What's the third book? Vayikra. And the fourth book is Bamidbar. And the fifth book is Devarim. So we are on book number 4. We're almost done. Just remind me, because we spoke about this so many times. When do we finish? When do we finish all the parshas of the year? At what point?
Rosh Hashanah.
Rosh Hashanah. Well, almost a little bit after Rosh Hashanah, Simchas Torah. We come to the shul and we dance with the Torah. We are celebrating the completion of the Torah. And this year, when all of you come to the synagogue and dance with the Torah, you are going to feel different because you will know what it means to truly have finished learning the Torah. There's a certain special energy that you're like, yeah, I went through this one time and now I'm ready to do it again. Because every time we learn something new. We never learn the same. It's unbelievable. So let's begin with our famous song. And we're going to start off. And last week, I felt like for the first time, people were singing with me. So let me not have a solo. Let's sing this together. Bereshis Noach lech lecha vayelach ha'isara toldos. Bereshis Noach lech lecha vayelach toldos. Vayishe vayishlach vayishe miketz vayigash vayichi shemos va'era bo bo bo. Shalach Yisrael Mishpatim, Shemos va'era, bo bo bo. V'shalach Yisrael Mishpatim, Teruma, Tetzaveh, Kisisa, Vayakel Pekudei. Book number 3. Vayikra Tav Shemini, Tazri Amatzara. Vayikra Tav Shemini Tazri Amatzara Achremos Doshim Emor Behar Bechukosai. Book number 4, that's the one we're in, Bamidbar. Bamidbar Naso Bahaloscha Shlach Korach Chukas. Chukas is the parsha we're up to today. Again, Bamidbar Naso Bahaloscha Shlach Korach Chukas Balak Pinchas Matos Masei. Then we've got one more book, Devarim. So we are in Parshas Chukas, and it's always interesting to see what is the name of the parsha. Because the name of the parsha tells us something interesting. Last week was Korach. We learned the story of Korach. So what page does the parsha of Chukas begin? I believe it's 988. Let's open up our Chumash to 988. And you know that one, huh? When you hear somebody say a bracha blessing, you say amen. Yeah, at the end. Amen means it should become true. So we say the blessing should become true.
So it's appropriate because sometimes
Yes, always say amen. You get a mitzvah. So
Really? You
yeah,
drink the water to the car? Am I saying that?
we both, you and me. Come on, it's an easy one.
That's a
Yeah.
double. That's a double.
I'll break them to you slowly. All right, so Parshat Chukat, and as I explained already for the past couple of weeks, Bamidbar, book number 4, means Ba Midbar, in the Midbar. I don't know who gave it the word. I mean, it's called numbers in English. I'm trying to still figure out the connection of that one, but literally Bamidbar means in the desert. And they are in the desert, and they're about over a year later since they received the Torah in the desert. They left Egypt, they traveled into the desert, they received the Torah on Mount Sinai, the whole story of the sin of the golden calf, the manna rains down from heaven, and Moshe starts to teach the Jewish people the Torah. And we spoke last week about, and this, it's constantly, each of these parshas are teaching us a lot of the laws that are being taught. So in Parshat Chukat, the first law that is introduced is the law or the mitzvah of the red heifer. Amia says she's heard of the red heifer. Anyone else have heard of the red heifer? Possible? Okay. Well, it's called in Hebrew the para aduma. Para is a cow, aduma means red. The red cow, the red heifer. And what do you know about the red heifer?
Used for purification, the ashes used for purification.
So the Kohen would take the ashes of the red heifer and use it to purify those that were impure. What's interesting about the para aduma is that the Kohen himself, through this process, would become impure. But the ashes would purify someone else. Laura, you correctly said it's going to come back. In fact, it says that there are 10 para adumas in the world. We've already seen 9 in Jewish history. When we discover the 10th one, it's a sign that Mashiach is coming, because the 10th one will be when Mashiach comes. So that's another interesting thing. And this parsha talks a lot about ritual impurity and how we deal with the concept of purity and impurity, mikvah, a lot of laws in that parsha, in this parsha. It also talks about in this parsha, Miriam passes away, Moshe's sister. It talks about Aaron's passing. So this is a very interesting parsha. It talks about Amalek. You know, you've heard of the nation of Amalek. Who comes from Amalek? The Arabs come from Ishmael. Avram had a second son, Ishmael. He had Yitzchak and Ishmael. The Arab nations come from Ishmael. But Amalek was a nation in the desert that they were the first ones that tried to attack the Jewish people after the leaving of Egypt. You know, nobody wanted to mess up with the Jews. They just witnessed the 10 plagues, the giving of the Torah in a miraculous way. Nobody was going to touch. No one was going to mess up. But Amalek was the first ones that tried to start up with the Jewish people right at the giving of the Torah. And here in this parsha, they do it a second time. Who is a descendant of Amalek? You all know this. It starts with an H, but it's not Hagar.
Isn't it Haman?
Very good. Hi, Terry.
Hi.
Haman. Haman was a descendant of Amalek. Now we understand a lot about who Haman was. In fact, the concept of Amalek is really an unbelievable concept. Like, there's so much to learn. We can't learn everything in 1 week, but you know, we have an Amalek within us. In fact, on Purim, when we bang our graggers, what are we banging? To get rid of Amalek. We are banging out Haman's name when we spin our graggers because we want to get rid of Amalek. Amalek is an Amalek within each and every one of us. Just like Amalek was the first nation to start with the Jewish people in the desert, they too, we have someone who, Amalek represents doubt. When you are sure about your decision, doing a good thing, somebody plants a seed of doubt, it's the worst thing. Doubt is what makes everything cool. You have passion and heat for something positive, and then the Amalek comes, it's like the hot bath, right? Nobody wants to go inside, but somebody puts their toe in, makes it a little bit cooler, and then everybody else can go in. Doubt cools off an idea. And we each have an Amalek within us. And that's part of the lesson of Purim. When we're stamping out Haman, we're stamping out doubt in our life. It's just throwing a random thought out there. So they, they continue traveling in this parsha. They have another war with Sichon. Sichon is another one of the people who tried to start up with the Jewish people. Then there's the war with Og Melech HaBashan. You know who Og Melech HaBashan was? He was a giant. Very interesting parsha. Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, by the way, Laura, we recorded also, so you're able to listen again. Yes, I do want to mention that today's class, we are dedicating the learning and memory of Karen Callahan. Her father passed away yesterday. You know, Karen comes to class. So her father passed away. The funeral will be tomorrow morning. And I told her this morning that we are all thinking of her and that we're going to dedicate today's class in memory of her father's neshama. So his neshama should have an aliyah, an elevation. And every mitzvah that we do down here gives elevation to a soul that can no more do mitzvahs. So I wanted to mention that. So we are going to start off Parshas Chukat with focusing on just one line, like we do pretty much every week. And that is, if you go back to the beginning of the Parsha, in Pasuk Aleph, in the beginning, it says, God spoke to Moshe and Aaron saying, we're on chapter 19, verse 1, page 989. This is the supra-rational command of the Torah, which God commanded, saying, tell the children of Israel. This is the first pasuk, the first chapter. He's talking about the red heifer, and he's about to give him the command. But the way Hashem prefaces it to Moshe, he doesn't just say, okay, tell them about this mitzvah. He says, this is the supra-rational command of the Torah, which God commanded. So he's being very clear that this is not just one of the commandments. This is a supra-rational command. Now, let's take for a moment to discuss this concept of supra-rational and in general, self-sacrifice, okay? You know, many times we place on a pedestal those that self-sacrifice, right? People that pay the ultimate price for what they believe in. But do you think that people should die for an ideal? You believe in something, should you die for it?
People do.
And many people do.
People do.
What's the Jewish view on this? Should you not? What is the answer?
I think if you feel deeply enough about it, you would put yourself out there.
So Susan says, if you feel deeply enough about it, you would put yourself out there. So there's actually a term that each and every one of you should be familiar with in Judaism. It's called Mesiras Nefesh. Mesirat Nefesh. Have you heard of it?
No.
Never heard of it? Anyone here has heard of that? You've heard of it?
I heard of it, yes. I think it was last Saturday.
Yes, I'm sure you've heard it. I'm sure you've heard it here for sure. Mesirat Nefesh means Meiser, to give up, Nefesh, your soul. That to pledge one's life to God, if need be, is actually one of Judaism's highest callings. And I'm sure many of you are wondering, wait a second, we're not a suicide cult. That's not what Judaism's about. But what's interesting is there was, I don't know if you've heard, there was a Danish philosopher called, I feel like I'm saying his name wrong, so correct me if you've heard of him, Soren Kierkegaard. Sandy, you know who it is? I see your mouth moving. So at least you've heard of him. He wrote in his diary the following.
Kierkegaard.
Thank
It's
you.
called.
What?
Kierkegaard.
He wrote, what matters is to find a purpose, to see what it really is that God wills that I should do. The crucial thing is to find a truth which is true for me, to find the idea for which I am willing to live and die. In other words, in his view, man is consumed by the search for purpose. And how do you know if you found a purpose? If you know that you're willing to live and die for it. So this is very difficult, I think, as Jews for us to understand, because when we survey Jewish literature throughout history, On the one hand, it's very clear that Mesiras Nefesh, self-sacrifice, is very prevalent. We know many people who died. Look at the Spanish Inquisition, the Holocaust. People die with Shema on their lips, saying, I'm a Jew, I will not give in, I will not bow down, I will not forsake Hashem. Many of us sitting here have grandparents and great-grandparents who literally died on Mesiras Nefesh. And on the other hand, when we hear jihad cries of suicide bombers, that's so anti-Jewish. But it's in other words, we as Jews are disturbed by the glorification of self-sacrifice, that someone says, I'm willing to die for it and kill others in the process. So there seems to be a conflict, and we need to understand what is Mesiras Nefesh in Jewish terms. And why is it held on such a high pedestal? But what does that actually even really mean? So we start off by reading the pasuk, which we just did. Pasuk is a verse that Hashem is about to give the commandment of the paraduma, the red heifer, and he says that I'm giving you a super rational commandment. Now, if you learn the word chokas, it stems from the root word of chok. Have you heard of the word chok before? Chesvav kuf, or C-H-O-K. I've said it many times in class. Chok is one of the three types of mitzvahs. There's mitzvahs that are mishpatim, ones that we understand. Don't kill, don't steal, the basics. You don't have to have such an intellectual understanding of it. It's what you have in every country. Then there's edim. Edim are witnesses. Things like Pesach, we do because to remember, so to speak, we witness the leaving of Egypt, so we eat matzah to remember that. Shabbos, Hashem rested on the seventh day, we do that to remember that. So there are those that like commemorate certain things, to witness what was. That's the second type of mitzvah. And then there's the third type of mitzvah from all the 613. They're divided into three categories that are called chukim. A chayk is something that we don't understand, like, for example, kosher. There are many reasons that you can study, delve into Kabbalistic philosophy that will tell you why kosher is important and what you are, what you eat, and the energy that you consume becomes an actual part of you. But at the end of the day, it's a chok. All the halachos, all the laws of purity and impurity are also chukim. What does it mean even to be pure? Like a woman who immerses in the mikveh, it's not a matter, it's not clean. She has to be completely clean before she enters into the mikveh. So it's not a clean thing, it's a spiritual thing. So there are certain category of mitzvahs that we do that are called chukim. We do them just because Hashem said. Now, we're not going to spend our lesson today discussing why we have chukim, because that could take 2 hours. But I will mention that chukim are extremely important in our relationship with Hashem, just like in every relationship, and everybody knows this, there are certain things we do even though we don't understand, right? If our spouse or our partner wants something done, when you love someone, you do it even if you don't understand it. That's part of what makes a good relationship. And in our relationship with Hashem, which is like, there's so many ways we can look at it, like a father to a child, a husband and a wife. But nevertheless, there are certain things we do for Hashem, even if we don't understand it. That's part of the relationship that we have with God. So the question that we have here is when we read this verse that Hashem is saying that this paraduma mitzvah is a chayk, chukas. That's what the name of the parsha is. It's Parsha's chukas. Chukas comes from the word chok, the super rational. So Rashi says, why is this commandment considered a chayk of the paraduma, of the red heifer? He says, Rashi writes, because the other nations of the world of Israel, of the world, are going to taunt Israel, and they're going to say, what is this commandment of the red heifer? What purpose does it have? So the Torah says, Hashem says, Rashi writes, I use the word chok because I decreed it, and you don't have any right to challenge it. So with these words, basically Rashi is quoting from the Medrash a fundamental Jewish principle that there are certain mitzvahs. In other words, it's for the first time introducing this idea of a chok, the first time in the discussion of mitzvos that the Torah is introducing to us what a hope actually means. And by the way, such a service to God is not rational, right? It's super rational. It's beyond our understanding. We do it even if we don't understand it. So this idea of doing things that are beyond logic is something that really propelled Jews throughout history to dedicate their lives to Hashem that really defied logic, right? Naturally, a person wants to live. That's just the way God created us, right? Naturally, a person desires life. When a person is suicidal, that's unnatural. That means a person is not well, right? So naturally, a person has a desire to live. So what propels a Jew to say, my relationship with God is so valuable, my relationship as a Jew, my identity is so valuable that I'm willing to die for who kills themselves in fire and hell just because they're a Jew. So this idea of mesirut nefesh, of self-sacrifice, is something that really is beyond logic. Makes no sense, right? So we understand that there are elements in our service to Hashem and our relationship with God that go beyond logic, that are super rational, right? So we're going to examine just for a moment a couple of texts that are going to explain to us how exactly this is done in our own lives. So first of all, in the Shulchan Aruch, in the Code of Jewish Law, it says that when a person recites the Shema prayer, it's supposed to say Shema in the morning and in the evening. What's the Shema prayer? Say Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. We declare that Hashem is one. That it has to be said with the conviction that one would rather be killed than compromise his belief that there's only one God. That's pretty intense. That's how intense the Shema has to be said. And the Shema prayer is not the only place where we are told to have like this suicidal readiness, so to speak. The Alter Rebbe in the book of Tanya, chapter 41, actually, that's the part of the chapter that Yocheved said at her bat mitzvah. She memorized a portion of that chapter, which is basically the Alter Rebbe says that every day when we wake up in the morning, we say Moda'ani, right? We thank Hashem for giving us life. And then we go on in our morning blessings and we say, you breathe the soul into me. And basically what we're saying, and we go in through the blessings where we thank God. And basically what we're saying is that every day we take for granted, but we wake up. Or maybe some people don't take for granted. If you've been through a life situation where that has been challenged, we don't take for granted that we wake up. But there's a certain, like, you wake up in the morning, okay, it's a good day, it's a bad day, but you woke up. Generally people wake up and go to sleep. But really, he writes in the Tanya, is that we have to have this awareness every time we wake up that it can be taken from us in an instant. We have to have this awareness that it's completely in God's hands and that it can be taken away from us. So we see over here just a couple examples with the Shema and the morning prayer, that there's like a focus, like almost like a morbid, like it can be taken away from you any moment. You have to say the Shema as if you're ready to die for it. Seems like a very interesting focus within Judaism itself. And we can absolutely appreciate, by the way, that there are certain people in the world that are committed to an ideal that they will die for it, like a soldier, right? A soldier knows he's going to battle, and if he has to lay his body down before an enemy, he's going to do that. And it is very admirable to a certain degree. But why does Judaism glorify this reality within us? Why is it, so to speak, an ultimate goal? And we need to have that in our lives on some level. So, interestingly enough, when it comes to talking about leaders of the Jewish people, self-sacrifice is a very important thing that actually in Judaism distinguishes what a Jewish leader is. So obviously a leader of the Jewish people, Moshe, someone like the Rebbe, we just celebrated his yahrzeit on Sunday, is obviously a person that is wise and confident and has empathy and learned. But actually, Kabbalah teaches us that what makes a leader is that he's willing to die for Judaism. And it talks about in Tanya and in Kabbalah how when a leader, specifically a tzaddik, a righteous person, when they pass away, everything that they sacrifice in their life to be a leader becomes heightened when they die. And it's a little bit confusing. Why when they die? When you're alive, that's when you see the greatness of the leader. After they die? Because the Alter Rebbe discusses in Tanya is that when a person passes away, when a person's alive, specifically a tzaddik, they're not bound, they're bound by their body. Their neshama, which is so pure and holy, only wants to do mitzvahs and is always having a desire to serve God. But it's bound, so to speak, or imprisoned by its body. All of us, by the way, are imprisoned by our bodies. Each and every one of us, our souls, have a desire to connect to God all the time because we come from God. We have a part of God inside of us. But we also have our animal soul that makes us crazy and tells us to do other things. And we have our body. But a tzaddik, if you study Tanya, knows doesn't have a Yetzer Hara, doesn't have that battle. He only has a desire to do good. That's why there's so few tzaddikim in the world, so few righteous people. Every generation always had a tzaddik of the generation. And any Rashi, Rambam, Maimonides, as I said, the Rebbe was an accepted tzaddik in our generation. So the concept over here is that when a tzaddik toils in his lifetime, it's never fully recognized or as effective because he's, so to speak, trapped in his body. The body, there's a certain, but when he passes away, then all that energy that was built up actually spills over and it's left behind. One of the examples in my own life that I see with this is I look at the Rebbe's life. I was relating to my children. I was 11 years old when the Rebbe passed away. The Rebbe was a recognized world leader. And people came to him all over from all over the world to consult with him and to get his advice and to learn from him. He taught the masses. And I remember, it's so amazing what you remember as a child. I remember the newspapers splashing all over what is going to become with the Chabad movement. There's no Rebbe, there's no leader. What's going to be? And if you look now, 27 years later, while we miss the Rebbe terribly, look at the effect the Rebbe had after his passing. You know that there's 4,000 Chabad houses open after the Rebbe's passing.
Well, what happened before? Was it not as popular?
It clearly, it's unbelievable how after the Rebbe's passing, his effect on the world, the fact that you are all sitting here today learning with me is due to the Rebbe's vision, not mine.
I have a question.
Yes.
What do you think would happen after so many generations? Because you were one of the last generations that's actually seen the Rebbe, you and Rebbe. Your kids haven't seen the Rebbe. So, I know they haven't seen him, and I know that you guys teach them about him, but it's different to relate to somebody you haven't seen, I guess.
It's actually a very interesting discussion because I look at my own children and I'm amazed at their relationship with him. But more than that, I'm amazed at his relationship with you. I'm amazed how many people in the world have never met the Rebbe, but have an unbelievable connection to him, even though they've never seen him.
I would agree. I mean, I was always told it was a little too extreme, the whole which is way over there. And I come from Holocaust survivors, and now that I see the effect, the teaching of Rebbe, it's just we fight differently. Like, you know, I say there's really proof of that.
Right. Literally, it's like, just look around.
It's a wonderful movement. It really is. It's so much better than the other.
The point is, what I'm trying to explain is that it's clear to me, and it's not complicated to see, like you said, it's just look around you, is that the Rebbe's influence as a tzaddik, as a righteous leader in his generation, his effect on the world is so everlasting, even more so after his passing. Which is, I'm not saying that I don't have questions. I'm not saying that it's not painful. Because at the end of the day, we're human beings. We live in this world. We don't live in the upper worlds. And we want to see it, like there's a prayer we say, we want to see it down here in this reality. It's very nice to have these conversations, not just about the Rebbe, but about all our loved ones, right? We know that they're neshamas and they're in a good place and all that good stuff, but we're human beings and we want to see it down here. So we're not asking, for this, but we're talking about the facts, the reality. The reality is that since the Rebbe's passing, his effect on the world, look at the Alter Rebbe, the one who wrote the Tanya. Do you know how many people in the world are affected by his teachings? You know how many people sitting here around this table have changed their lives based on a book that was written by a Rebbe, hundreds of years ago? It's crazy. I mean, we're talking about life-changing, not just, oh, that's a nice commentary. Life-changing. And we're just in our little tiny hole in Venice, we're just a small dot in the world. This is multiplied by thousands and thousands of locations of people. The world has been transformed. It's not even a question. So at the end of the day, we ask Hashem for Mashiach. At the end of the day, we say, Hashem, this is not the way it's meant to be. We're not meant to live with a with leaders who are. We want to see it down here. We want to see Mashiach in reality. We want to see this world get to its completion, and not to its completion, to its ultimate, the way it's meant to be since the beginning of time. We want that now. Enough of the tragedies, enough of the tsaras, enough. But we also have to accept that the world that we live in today, there's a plan. There's a goal. There's something cosmic shifting going on. And it's clear that the Rebbe was part of that cosmic shift and that influence on the world. Just like every Jewish leader was. Right? Look at Moshe. Look at the Rambam. Look at Rashi. Look at any great Jewish leader in their time. Look at the effect they had on the world forever. Till today. So Jewish leadership, it's not like a president, political party. Jewish leadership has always been something very big within Judaism. In fact, the idea of visiting the grave sites of holy tzaddikim, in Israel, a lot of people go and they visit grave sites. Rabbi was on Sunday in New York. You know how many hours he waited online? For 30 seconds. 6 hours. 6 hours he waited online. And he said that when you're not allowed to stop, you just have to keep moving right when you get into the ohel. And he said, but he had it from Venice, a nice package of letters that people sent with him. So they gave him an extra minute so he can put everybody's in. He says, they said, okay, you have an extra second. Anyways, the point is that the concept of a tzaddik, a righteous person, a tzaddik, there are very few in every generation, but they make an effect on the world. And being in touch with the tzaddik also helps us to recognize our own potential of what can be. So I veered off a little bit. I just wanted to use that as an opportunity, being that we celebrated the Rebbe's yahrzeit. In fact, on the day of a tzaddik's passing, their energy is actually extremely potent and anyone can access that. So what was the lifetime achievement of a tzaddik? And again, I'm just for those that are unfamiliar, a tzaddik, loosely translated, comes to mean a righteous person. But it's not just a righteous person like, those good people that we know in our lives. We're talking about somebody who, according to Tanya, does not struggle with his Yetzer Hara. His neshama is never battling. Most of us, even if we're good people, we're always struggling. We try to have Beinani moments for my Tanya friends. But a tzaddik is somebody who's higher than a Beinani, somebody who has completely overcome his Yetzer Hara. So in other regards, so here's something very interesting. The Rebbe, who spoke many times in his talks when he referenced the previous Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Frierdiker Rebbe was Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson. And for my Russian friends, many of you are familiar that he gave a tremendous amount of his life, and he actually physically self-sacrificed his life. He was very ill at the end of his life due to the beatings he received in prisons in Russia for trying to save Judaism. And in 1920, when Russia was in complete turmoil, right, the Bolshevik Revolution, in 1917, and communists started to sweep into Russia, religion in general at that time was at a crosshair. And before long, shuls, synagogues, yeshivos, and Jewish institutions were completely shut down. And the Frierdiker Rebbe's father, the Rebbe Rashab, who, by the way, his name was Shalom Dovber, that's who my husband's named after. Shalom Dovber was the father of the previous Rebbe. In Chabad, just so you're familiar, there are 7 Rebbes. Alter Rebbe being the first, the Mittel Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, the Rebbe Maharash, the Rebbe Rashab, his son, the Frierdiker Rebbe, and then the Rebbe. That's the chain. So the Frierdiker Rebbe's father, the Rebbe Rashab, he foresaw the destruction of Jewish life. And he told his son, the Frierdiker Rebbe, who was the Rebbe before our Rebbe, with the mission of keeping the flame of Yiddishkeit alive. And he gave very clear instructions. He says, I want you to do anything you can to ensure the survival of Judaism and the Torah. You should give up your life for it. And the Rebbe actually writes in one of his diaries that obviously true leadership, things to do with the Rebbe, but any leader, right, in life requires sacrifice. Just by being a leader, right, you need certain sacrifice that even if it consumes his life, that's what a leader does. And obviously, we greatly value anybody who rises up to the occasion as a leader to devote one's life. But here the Rebbe continues to discuss that it's not just the Frierdiker Rebbe who gave up, who literally had Mesiras Nefesh. I mean, he had a gun to his head many times in Russian prison. By the way, if anyone's interested just to understand the Frierdiker Rebbe's mission, read the book. I'll put it on the WhatsApp after, A Prince in Prison. It is an unbelievable tale that the Frierdiker Rebbe himself writes about his time in Russian prison for trying to keep Judaism alive. They literally tortured him, beat him, threw him downstairs, and he suffered for this for the rest of his life. When he came to America, he came in a wheelchair, and he continued to fight for what he believed to be true. But the Rebbe writes something very interesting. He says this idea of Mesiras Nefesh, okay, leaders, tzaddikim, they have Mesiras Nefesh. That's part of the job, so to speak. But it's not just an obligation for a leader to have Mesiras Nefesh, but it's actually bequeathed to those that connect to the leader. In other words, this idea is that the sacrifices that a leader makes of Mesiras Nefesh are not expected of him alone, but it's just merely to serve an example to us. That means that we have a mission to live a life of Mesiras Nefesh, which means that to the extent that we would need to give up our life for it. Now, that's a pretty heavy demand. Why does Judaism make, so to speak, a suicidal demand? If there's one thing that we've learned over the years is that we're not like blind allegiance. That's not Judaism. Judaism is an intellectual, understanding, brilliant identity. Why does it seem that there's like almost like an obsession with self-sacrifice to some degree? And we understand, again, we spoke about a leader's mission of Mesiras Nefesh, but we have that obligation as well. Where does this come into play? So in order to understand the concept of Mesiras Nefesh, of self-sacrifice, we need to understand a little bit the psychological foundations of Mesiras Nefesh. In other words, and we will understand why it's not like intellectually immature to give up one's life for something, for a particular reason. In between paying the bills and, we try to keep our friends and family happy, and between all our obligations in life, at some point in life, everybody, most people at one point in their life will say, what's the meaning of life? At some point or the other, at some age, what's the purpose of living? Why am I here? And we'll go around and we'll ask different people. The baseball fan will say that the Yankees are his life. He goes to every game, he memorizes the statistics. When they lose, he mourns and he rejoices when they win. If you ask a teacher what defines her life, she'll say, I lie at night, I wake, worrying about my students. She devotes hours to helping her students. And when they succeed, she has like unbelievable pride. That's a teacher. If you ask an artist, what's his life? The same thing, I'm always involved in the swirl of colors and designs. And I spend many hours thinking about the perfect masterpiece. So obviously these people that I just mentioned as example, their lives are filled with meaning. And we admire people who have meaning in their life, right? No one likes to see an aimless 30-year-old with no purpose, still trying to find themselves. But is this truly their lives? Or is it something that they fill their lives with? And I'll repeat the sentence so that sinks a little deeper. Is this truly their lives? Or is this something that they fill their lives with? In other words, do their goals and their ambitions, obviously it colors the fabric of their life, but is that the fabric itself? What do you think?
You can ask the question right after that question. This concept of giving up one's life. Is it definitely?
It's a good question. So in answer to that, I want to bring up another point. How do you find out how much something means to a person? You ask them a simple question. Would you die for it?
See, this is
Okay, so let me go with this for a minute.
Okay.
When a fish talks about its obsession for water, it's true. He'll die without it. So, like when a woman says that her family is her life, believe her. Because she's not telling you what she fills her day with. She's telling you what her life is. A mother will naturally die for her children. Ask any mother. But that's why I use the word naturally. It's more natural for a mother to say, I'll die for my kids than not. It's unnatural the other way. And some might say, I'm not sure, but when the time comes, God forbid, if the time would come, that's what mothers instinctively do. So the baseball fan might love the Yankees, but figuratively speaking, he would never die for them. Or maybe some would.
Yeah, it might be.
How do we quantify the difference? Why don't these diehard fans, these unbelievable people, these teachers, artists, why don't they go all the way? What's the difference between a mother's dedication to her kids that motivates her to lay down her life if she was put in that position? Because part of a desire within every human being, when we say that we want to find meaning in our lives, we want to sense that there's something bigger than ourselves. The baseball fan, the teacher, the artist, they have not discovered life's true meaning. They may have found meaningful occupations and hobbies, but they're never going to transcend their own appreciation for these activities. In other words, most people, like, for example, if you're a certain fan and then the team disappoints you over and over again, right? You don't have any benefit from it anymore. You leave the team. Or if a teacher, right? If a teacher feels exhausted day in, day out, at one point she gets burnt out, she loses a teaching job. So if it's no longer enhancing their life, they'll cut free from it. And how much more so if it threatens their life, they'll certainly abandon it. In the Rebbe's words, Mesirat Nefesh is a supra-rational idea. Logically, a person seeks to do things that will enhance his identity, naturally. To do something that will absolutely do away with his life and destroy his identity is logically out of the question. It's very deep words. Mesirat Nefesh, this is the words of the Rebbe, is a supra-rational idea, like the word chok. Logically, a person seeks to do things that will enhance his identity, to do something that will absolutely do away with his life and destroy his identity is logically out of the question. So true purpose and ideal is when we dedicate, when a person feels that it's so true, this thing, this identity, if it's a mother, if it's their Judaism, whatever it is, that they are willing to lay down their life for the purpose because it's far greater and more valuable than their own life. So it's not necessarily, it's not at all about a suicide run here, but it's a dedication to something bigger than yourself. And there's no need, by the way, to actually give up your life. But your willingness to do so is the barometer of how much you put your own identity aside and dedicate it to something larger. It's very heavy.
I'm struggling with it because my reaction, and I'm trying to moderate reaction. My perfect children was with you. It's because I can't live without it. I could not live without it. Absolutely. I know that's not true. I'll be years that I would not burn the shul down.
Burn the shul down, though. Okay, so let me switch it around. Burning the shul down is level 1. But what about if they say, denounce your identity as a Jew or I will kill you? You. What would you say then?
And you know what? These people mean nothing to me. I will do not because I have in my heart. I know that I will be. It's all good.
Right. First of all, you should ever, God forbid, be in such a situation. You know what I'm saying? To be tested, to know what you would respond. But there are so many Jews who said the same thing. How come there were so many Jews at the Spanish Inquisition who they lived their lives, by the way, as Marranos, right? They gave up everything of their Judaism because they wanted to live a regular life. And like they said, like you, I know Hashem in my heart is my Judaism, and that's it. But when the time came at the Hora de Fe, that when they came to be burned at the stake because they were caught and they were given the choice. These were people who lived lives completely in secrecy. They weren't like Jews who right away came out openly. These were Jews who it was more important to them to live, comfortably, and they said all you have to do is admit Admit that you just give your life over to the cross, whatever it was, and you will be saved. All of them died. What? It's something super rational. It doesn't make sense. So
I thought that they would be killed anyway, no matter what they said.
I believe their death was
A
different.
death sentence, but perhaps it would have been.
It wouldn't be burned publicly. They wouldn't be as tortured. Listen, we shouldn't have to know of such things. The bottom line is that, when the Apollo space shuttle first went to the moon in 1969, then President Richard Nixon, he had a speech prepared in the event that the astronauts would fail. And this is a little piece from the undelivered speech they got. He wrote, "These brave men," can you imagine? He prepared a speech just in case. "Neil Armstrong and Edwin Aldrin know that there is no hope for their recovery, but they also know that there is hope for mankind in their sacrifice. These two men are laying down their lives in mankind's most noble goal, the search for truth and meaning." In other words, we can agree to come to a conclusion that when a person is willing to die for something, it shows that there's a purpose larger than themselves, to the extent that he will give up his life for it. And when we find such meaning in our lives, then our worldview, it's completely expanded. Look at life very, very differently. Because when we live our lives with the ability to have Mesiras Nefesh, not to do it, but with the ability and the knowledge that we could, we find great meaning in our lives. When a mother thinks about the bottomless love that she has for her child, she soars beyond the relationship that she has now. In other words, even without being called upon to die for her kid's sake, she lives her life as if she did, because that's what a natural bond of a mother and a child is. This is what Mesiras Nefesh means, that if you aren't willing to die for something, then what do you live for? It's very interesting. My kids, they started, comic books are very in now. I don't know if you know, I mean, they've always been in, but like they a lot of the books, at least in the Jewish stores they sell now, they tell like very, I have to take away some of them because they're a little bit too intense. Like you see a kid's book in the store, you buy it for your kid, then like I actually start to read it to them at bedtime. They're like talking about Eichmann's trial in comics. I'm like, you should not be reading this. But it was actually a story I was reading to them about the Spanish Inquisition. And the guy got saved, thank God, at the end. And it's quite dramatic, but they make it in like kid-friendly versions, so like you don't realize. So Mendel tells me the other day, he says, "Ma, he's 8 years old. I think that if the Spanish Inquisition came to me, I would for sure die as a Jew." What are you talking about? I mean, who talks like that when you're 8 years old? It was so powerful to me as a mother to hear that. He's not more special than any of my other kids, but he read this book. He was, reading about the Mesiras Nefesh and the self-sacrifice. And in his mind, yep, this is, I can see myself doing it if I had to. It was very inspiring because, in a sense, I don't believe we should teach morbid things to our children. We should teach our children to live, not to die. We should teach on our own. We should have the ability to live. So many Jews are willing to die for Judaism, but not live for Judaism. It's another problem. We'll die for Judaism, but to keep the actual basic mitzvah, we're willing to die for it, we're not willing to live for it. But it's a tremendous, that if you take a moment to think about, are you willing to die for something, your meaning in life completely changes. Okay, so let's just get practical here. It's getting so late. Winston Churchill once said, although prepared for martyrdom, I prefer that it be postponed. You know, nobody wants to be in such a position. How do we implement this idea or this commandment, right? There's a commandment that there are going to be certain things in our life that are going to defy logic. So I'm going to end with this unbelievable story of the Tzemach Tzedek. The Tzemach Tzedek was the third Chabad Rebbe. And the Hasidim at the time, they gathered in the Tzemach Tzedek's room and they farbring the Hasidic, they farbring in a Hasidic gathering. And he emerges from the room and then he says the following line. It's in Hebrew, but listen carefully. Mali katla kula, mali katla palga. But at least it should be katla palga. I know you don't understand a word I'm saying. What's the story?
The last letter is mine.
Okay. So what is the Tzemach Tzedek during the Hasidic gathering, he said a verse from the Talmud. Mali katla kula, mali katla palga. This is a verse from the Talmud. Okay, what does this mean? If you want to loosely translate it, it means what difference is there to me whether he killed entirely or whether he killed halfway? That's what it means literally. I'll repeat it. What difference is there to me whether he killed entirely or whether he killed halfway? So this is mentioned. This is a Talmudic argument that seeks to say that is there such a thing as a half a measure? In other words, the argument over here is that once something is done partially, it should be considered as if it's completely done. And the Talmud comes to the conclusion that yes, this is logical. Rashi doesn't elaborate on this. And we understand that this verse is basic logic according to Torah. So let's understand, what does that mean? What do you mean? If it's done partially, it's done all the way? That's not true. Half done is half done. The logic goes like this, okay? Why is one required to pay, right? In the times of when animals were forms of payment, you only pay if the animal was killed, but not if the animal was damaged. What's the difference to the owner if the animal got killed or if it cut its foot? Regardless, now the animal cannot work. So the owner, it makes no difference on a working level if the animal's in a coma or if it's in heaven. So according to the Talmud, if it's damaged or if it was killed, no difference, you have to pay. Let's put in today's perspective. Let's say I borrow a car from you. What difference to you is if the car is burnt and it cannot be used anymore, or if the car is totaled, or if the car is broken? I don't have a car to get to work. What's the difference if your iPad is missing or it's broken? At the end of the day, I can't use it. What's the difference?
But you can get it back. It can be repaired. You can find your iPad. It's only done part way.
Right. So while this is true, it's talking about in regards to the present, the moment. This is what it's referring to. This is the context of what it's coming through. So, or there's also an idea, what happens if I embarrass someone fully or just a little bit? Regardless, you have to say, I'm sorry for the embarrassment. What's it also in the positive? What's the difference if I'm a little kind or I'm very kind? Today I was kind, person experienced complete kindness. So whatever, this is a whole Talmudic discussion. I'm trying to explain the verse that Tzemach Tzedek said at the Farbringen. But the idea is that there are certain scholars that liken the loss of blood to the full death of an animal. That's what the context of this verse was saying. So this is what the idea meant in this particular context. That's where the verse came from. If we want to take the verse a little bit farther in our lives, we can understand it to be the following. If we discover that something exists along the spectrum, okay? And you start, let me explain that a little bit better. When a person is working on something in their life in a matter of steps, the first step is the real breakthrough. Because after that, it's only a matter of a few more steps until they reach the conclusion. Take, for example, the 12-step program of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? It's actually the most demonstrative idea of this truth, of this verse, because somebody who sunk so deeply into the darkness of being an alcoholic, at that point, being sober seems impossible. They feel like if they take that giant leap, they're going to fall. But this, for those that are familiar with it, the 12-step program, it's actually faith-based, which advocates that addiction is broken in a multi-step program. So the first step to breaking out of the chain of becoming a full-blown alcoholic is actually taking the first step out of that world and stepping into the world of becoming sober. So from the moment he takes that first step, just step one, he is no longer considered, you don't call him an alcoholic. He didn't become sober yet, but you don't say he's an alcoholic. Because it's not so much whether I'm half sober or fully sober. The point is I decided enough is enough, and I have woken up from this nightmare of alcoholism. So it's not so much about the destination as much as the journey. By the way, this is with other addictions as well. Let's say somebody who's a smoker. So let's say the smoker is defined by somebody who smokes a pack a day. So once he decides that he's going to quit smoking, then let's say for that person, going cold turkey is impossible. So he says, I'm going to have the first cigarette of the day a little bit later, an hour later. And then he skips it altogether. And eventually he gets into that habit, whatever it takes for him to become a non-smoker. So at that point, when he first went smoke-free for the first hour of the day, you can no longer consider him a smoker. Because once a person embarks on the path of quitting, he has broken out of the habit and started a journey towards being smoke-free. You understand what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. This is where this concept, this verse from the Talmud applies, that partial is considered all. There's an element that when you begin something, when you start to do something, there's value to it, as if this journey is like you're at the beginning or the end. That's for sure. The Rebbe brought this empowering example of Mali Kalta Kula, Mali Kalta Palga in connection to Mesiras Nefesh. That the first step is really to redefine, like you asked before, what is Mesiras Nefesh? What is self-sacrifice? In our day and age today, unfortunately, if you look at the people that are killed in Israel or anywhere around the world for being a Jew, that's as real as it gets, right? People whose lives are actually taken. But as long as a person sacrifices their desires in their life for Hashem, that means he has practiced a certain element of Mesiras Nefesh. In the word nefesh literally means soul. So Mesirat Nefesh means sacrificing his soul. But actually, there's another reference in the Tanakh that nefesh could also mean desire. So here's the big question. Do I need to sacrifice every desire I have just to be a good Jew? You know, it's like, do I have to say I'm going to do it all the way? Or that's it? Is it either or? So here comes this idea of when a person says, I'm dedicated and I'm going to make any step in my life, you're in the club. You're in the club of Mesiras Nefesh, you're in the club of dedication. And dedication and commitment is a type of thing that's either yes or no. Either you're in it or you're out. The only difference is that a person could be more dedicated or more committed. And a person could be less dedicated or less committed. But whether you're dedicated or committed is an in or out. So over here, the Tzemach Tzedek was telling us a very powerful message in our own lives, that we don't have to despair if we're not completely devoted, if we're not completely committed, because every action that we take on our journey called life and our relationship with Hashem, every time we do something that whatever it is in our life, if it's keeping Shabbos just on Friday night, if it's taking out one non-kosher item in your life and saying, I'm not going to eat crab anymore, I'm going to eat whatever it is, one thing, one step, this is precious in the eyes of Hashem. And what's interesting is Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, he had a saying that every Jew is precious to Hashem as an only child born to his parents in their old age, when the smallest effort is considered an enormous task. It's like, like somebody who, they look at their kids, they're like a combination of like Einstein, Beethoven, and Moses all in one. Like literally the first step that child took, it's like they broke science for life. Those types of people.
Yeah.
I'm just checking. So that's the way actually Hashem thinks of us. That's the way, the love that God looks at us.
Nice.
It's a nice feeling, right?
That's very nice.
So I want to say that the previous Rebbe writes in his diaries an unbelievable story that happened to him. He writes like this. This is the previous Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe. We came to the resting place of the Tzemach Tzedek and the Rebbe Marash. They came to the gravesite, and we entered into the synagogue before going to the gravesite. And he writes, my father opened the ark and said, remember I told you that he instructed his son, the Frierdiker Rebbe, to give up his life for Judaism in Russia. So they're standing now at the gravesite of his grandfather. And the Rebbe Rashab says, I'm bringing my son today to the Akedah. The sacrifice is firmly bound. Avraham bound his son Isaac in order that there should be no fault found in him, God forbid. I also want that the Akedah should be as is desired. My father cried violently, and I also cried with him, not knowing a thing. My father then studied half a chapter from Igeret HaKodesh in front of the open ark. He then turned to me and said, in front of the Holy Fathers, I wish to make a covenant with you. My father then pulled me towards him and placed his holy hands on me and said, from this point on, I'm giving over to you the duty of communal advocacy in matters of material and spiritual. He then went on to talk about the discourse, she girds her loins with might, that my mission starts with loins. Rationale and contemplation come afterward. Loins must be girded, and what is that girdle? Might. And what is that might? Mesirat nefesh, self-sacrifice. And what is Mesirat nefesh? Azoy unit anders, which in Yiddish, it must be so and not otherwise. So in this episode that I just read to you, he basically told the Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, that you have a responsibility of caring for your Jewish brethren. And he says that you have no alternative. Your life mission is going to be this self-sacrifice. So this idea of self-sacrifice, I'm sorry I got so late, I just realized we got into a lot of discussion today, is that we can do it in starts and stops, in little bits, and Hashem knows what we're talking about. We just need to create space in our self-absorbed lives to make a little bit of room for Hashem. And we can find each and every one of us sitting around this table today and on Zoom can find examples in their life that we can do to just break something. We may not be ready to be a full-time Torah scholar, but as soon as we stretch our schedules and we allow a little bit of time for Torah study, we opened up room. We made room for Hashem. You know, it can be tough, especially in today's economy, to give tzedakah. But as soon as we give an extra penny beyond what we feel comfortable, we already demonstrate that money doesn't define our life and we have loftier ideals. So whatever it is in our life, if a person, as I said, you know, says, I'm going to keep Shabbos for a half hour, we already break that stranglehold that says that my life is so committed, and we're committing ourselves to something higher. And I'm sure each and every one of us could find things in our life that really are mysterious nefesh. Yes, it's not asking us to give up our lives, but we're breaking our nefesh, we're breaking our desire, we're breaking things in our life that are, we you know, so many of us, we live our lives so bound by certain truths, whether it be money or time or commitments, or this is the way I was raised. But when we start to just break just a little bit, make a little bit more room for Hashem in our lives, this is something very, very much treasured to Hashem. And just by behaving within this mysterious nefesh, we're part of the club. We're following this commandment of this is the chok, this is the super rational element in our lives. I cannot believe it got so late. Forgive me. I'm going to end. If you have to go, but I'm going to end with one last story that I loved as a child. The Alter Rebbe, the one who we spoke a lot about Chabad Rebbe's today. The Alter Rebbe, who was Rav Shneur Zalman of Yadi, he went to collect. He was the first Chabad Rebbe, the Alter of the Tanya. He was raising money to ransom Jewish prisoners, and he traveled to a city that was famous for this very, very wealthy man who was a miser. And despite the considerable wealth that this man had, he ignored every rabbi that came to his door to ask for money for poor people, for yeshivas, for everything. He did not give a penny. He was very, very wealthy. As my husband would say, if you're a miser, of course you're wealthy, right? You're not giving any tzedakah. So the Rebbe the Alter Rebbe was adamant that he was going to go to this guy. And the rabbis that accompanied him said, we're not coming with you. Nobody gets money from this guy. It's a waste of our time. We're going to be humiliated by him. He doesn't give tzedakah. Don't bother. But the Rebbe was adamant. The Alter Rebbe said, I'm going, whether you come or not. So, of course, they come with him. They're standing outside the mansion the next day, and the Alter Rebbe turns to his companions, the rabbis that were with him, the delegation. He says, I'm just asking you, do not say one word. Allow me to do the talking. Don't utter a sound. A few minutes later, they're ushered in. They're sitting in this beautiful living room, and he comes in, and the Alter Rebbe tells him he's raising money for, Jewish prisoners who need to be ransomed. In Russia, they weren't thrown into prison for anything that they did wrong. They thrown into prison for just being a Jew. And he tells the whole story to the man and what's going on. And the rich man says, this is a very touching story, indeed. There's widows and orphans in captivity. I feel terrible. Please take my donation. And he pulls out a little rusty copper coin, one. It's like equivalent to a penny. And to the miser's surprise, the Rebbe seems very pleased with the gift. He turns to him, he smiles warmly, he puts the coin in his pocket. He says, Mr. Solomon, thank you so much. May Hashem bless you, protect you always. And he proceeds, he writes out a donation receipt, and he puts a beautiful blessing on it. He puts his signature on it. He says, and he shakes his hand. He says, thank you so much, my friend. You don't know what you're doing for the Jewish people. And he looks at him with deep admiration. Says, we have a lot, more people to visit. Thank you so much. We're going to go on our way. And as they walk out of the door, one of the rabbis turned to the Alter Rebbe and says, "Did you really? You should have taken that coin and thrown it back in his face." I mean, it's such a chutzpah, a Rebbe, not just a rabbi, a Rebbe comes to your door to ask money for prisoners, Jewish fellow prisoners, and you're filthy rich, and you give a rusty, they couldn't get over it. The Rebbe says, don't turn around, don't say a word, keep moving. Walk down the path, the door opens up behind them, and the miser says, Rabbi, please come back for a moment. I need to speak to you. They're sitting back again in the living room, and he says, how much do you need to release these prisoners? The Alter Rebbe says, I need 5,000 rubles. He says, you know what? I'm going to give you 1,000. I decided to give you 1,000. You can count it if you want. He counts 1,000. I mean, the rabbis are in shock. He thanks him again. He writes him a beautiful receipt. He looks at him with deep admiration, thanks him, shakes his hand, walks down the path. Walking out, one of the rabbis turns to the Rebbe, says, this is an unbelievable miracle. The Rebbe says, don't say a word. They're almost out of the house, out of the pathway. Rabbi, please come back. Come back. I need to talk to you again. They enter into the house for the third time. The miser turns, gives him the full sum of the 5,000 rupees. He says, please count it. I want to make sure I didn't make any mistake. And then again, the same thing. After they leave the rich man's home, the rabbis turn to the Rebbe and says, okay, what's going on here? How did this happen? How is it possible that a person who was known for giving a rusty kopeck, a little penny, gave you 5,000 rubles? So the Rebbe said, this is the lesson of our story. This man is no miser. He just never learned what it means to give. He never broke his veneer of being tight-fisted. Once you crack the covering, then you've punctured it somewhat. And the peeling process becomes completely effortless. The minute he felt what it means to give, and he was appreciated for it, the rusty kopeck, that step began, and then the rest just slid right out. And that is the lesson really for our own lives. We don't have to take upon huge things in our life. The Mesiras Nefesh that's demanded of us, or that's commanded to us, we're not taught. Thank God we're not living in a time where Mesiras Nefesh requires jumping into fires with Shema on our lips. Baruch Hashem. But the Mesiras Nefesh that is required is the small areas in our life. And for each and every one of us, that means something different. But we just have to puncture that hole. What's keeping us back? Ask ourselves, what's holding us back in our own lives? What's holding us back from growing closer to our identity, to our neshama, to our relationship with Hashem? And when we start to make small holes, you'll see that everything else flows so much easier. So that's the lesson of today on the first line of the Chumash. Now we have a lot more to discuss. I wish you a wonderful week. Next week, we're going to have class. I am planning to do, I mentioned last week, we start our summer camp in 2 weeks. So I'm hoping to do it definitely to do it during camp. I'll let you know if there's a time change. And then, yeah, we'll keep going till we stop. And that's it.
Thank you, Chaya, Rivka.
You are welcome.
Have a good week too.
Thank you. This class literally took an hour and a half. I apologize, but it was like the good old days of the book club, right? Where you think it's great. Okay. Feel free to leave if you ever have to leave early. But now we're just in time for the schmooze. So come have something.
Thank you.
For the bonus.
Jealous.
Thank you.
You are welcome. All right.
Very, very smart.
You think so? You knew how to, but isn't that because it's humanity. Good, keep coming.
I'm waiting for another deliveries and they're coming on downstairs